Hey folks, over the past webinars, we've journeyed from why unifying identity and network security matters to how to get started with the basics. And in our last session, we set up the foundations, right? Like, things like automated user provisioning, device onboarding and compliance, and even securing access to on-prem apps with conditional access policies. So today we are going hands-on to turn these foundations into a real project plan for deployment. So think of this as a workshop, right? We'll walk through practical scenarios and best practices. Essentially, it's going to be like a playbook for rolling out Entra Suite in your organization. We'll highlight some crucial design decisions, show you the right order to enable different features, and demonstrate solutions for common challenges, like securely onboarding users, enabling remote access, and then governing internet access. In addition to this, what we're also going to do is throughout today's session, we'll talk about some common myths like that practitioners have about identity and network access. Now, the first one that we want to talk about is that many believe deploying more premium security tools will always mean better protection. But the latest research from Secure Employee Access in the Age of AI report shows the opposite. So what they found out is that 94% of organizations experienced an identity or network access incident in the past 12 months. And then 26% of those incidents, they actually resulted in a breach with direct business impact. The other thing is that organizations with more than 6 identity or network access solutions, they saw a 79% increase in significant breaches compared to 45% for those with fewer than 6. So the reality is that tool sprawl and complexity actually increases risk. So that's why this workshop is all about simplifying and integrating for real resilience. So I'm joined by my colleague Ramiro Calderon, the mind behind the Entra Suite workshop. He will co-present on some technical sections. We also have Martin Kurtzer and Thomas Detzner on the line. They're both my colleagues. Please ask questions as we go. We have experts standing by and we'll answer live at the end via comments. Now that we know what's in store, Ramiro, why don't you share why this workshop is so important and what our audience will get out of it?
Sure. Martin, Thomas, Meryl, myself, and many others in the team work in help out the largest and most complex customers to deploy Entra. So this workshop is basically the result of our learning on how to do it, and everything that you will see today has it has a lot of thought and cycles and kind of real mileage in the industry, and just to kind of frame a little bit how the workshop came to be. Many years ago, we had a customer who was just looking for a transformation environment, and he was all in and looking for our help. So he basically told us, "Hey, here's my entire team. We want to go with the Entra solution to optimize and to get to the next level of security and simplify my environment. So where do we start? And here's my entire team. We're ready to your advice." So we helped them that time. We worked with them and sat down with them, did some whiteboarding exercise and all that. But it became pretty clear that they are not going to be the only customers that are going to require that level of mapping a roadmap. So the idea behind creating this workshop format is to help you to create your own journey based on our best practices of deployment. So you will see, as Martin showed later, that everything from left to right, top to bottom, we are trying to share with you what to do, in what order, and then how many things. For example, in my customer case, is I have my entire team at my disposition. I can go as fast as I can. So we have to think about what things can be done in parallel. So what you will see in the workshop is how to kick off those initiatives. What are the critical decisions that you need to make that will create dependencies in your deployment? And then based on the scenarios you want to tackle, you will see how fast and how efficient can you go. So I'm going to hand it over to Martin to go into the details on the format, but then we'll later go with scenario by scenario.
Awesome. Thanks, Ramiro. Ramiro, I really love that, the origin story for the workshop and, why it was created. So we have Martin coming on to share about the workshop, show us the whole spreadsheet and how it works and what it was made for. What should people start looking at, Martin? Like, what are the basics they should do when they use this playbook?
Yeah, and so Meryl, this whole workshop starts with a spreadsheet, but I want to tell people that they should look at our workshop guide, and we'll share the link with people to go and start this process in their organization. So, for example, you have to get the right people in a room for you to be able to discuss all of these features and decide how you're going to prioritize that and so on. So, it's very important to set up dedicated time in a meeting room and getting to know what is happening in your environment. So, we've actually created a delivery guide which people can use to go through each one of these steps and decide how they're going to do it. And what you will do in that workshop is you will open up this spreadsheet and you will go through this one by one and decide how you're going to tackle that.
Right. So, who should be invited to this workshop, Martin? Like, and how long does it usually typically take to go through this planning process?
So you should invite all the stakeholders of your environment. So the stakeholders for your Entra Suite. So we have this Microsoft Entra Suite workshop delivery guide, and in here, this is everything that you need. And so here's a link to the spreadsheet that you can go and download the spreadsheet. And we have all the stakeholders that you need to have in your environment. So you need to have your identity and access management people in there, people from your SOC. We're going to touch on the device people needs to be, your app dev people.
Right. So because we are talking zero trust, right? It's not like just one product that you're deploying. You need representation from these various stakeholders in this session to actually make it meaningful, right? And have a holistic approach to zero trust.
Yeah, because you're going to sit in this discussion and you're going to bring up, oh, I need to go and do something with my devices. I need to go and deploy, for example, a GSA agent to my devices. And so the Intune team will be able to say to you, yes, that's fine. We can handle that. Just share that agent with us.
I mean, I've been in a few workshops and I've seen that sort of synergy when everyone is in the room. It's really fast and easy to call out and have the responses come through. Because if you don't even have them in the room, it's hard to say, and people say, oh, we'll have to ask this person, and then it's left as an open task, and you don't really sort of get moving or progressing towards the state you want. So I think it's really important to make sure that all the people are in that one room. And so how long does this workshop take to do? Like if we were to walk through that workshop and the blueprint that's there in the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I would recommend that people set aside at least 4 to 6 hours, depending on the complexity of the environment. So that is what we've seen with other customers. Your mileage might vary, as they say, but this is something that you need to set enough time apart to go through.
And do they need an SME as well? It would be helpful if they have someone who knows this and can walk them through, right? Maybe from Microsoft or a partner who can guide the entire process. But it's possible. Can we do it self-service if I'm a big enough enterprise and I have the right folks? Can it be done as a self-service thing by the org itself?
Yes, definitely. We share all of this information with everybody out there. So if you're an organization that are very familiar with all of these tasks, then you should be able to very easily do it yourself.
One comment I want to make on the duration, right? So we have done this probably hundreds of times, and 6 hours is kind of the sweet spot. But we have seen some customers that may take a little bit longer if they have to bring new people to the conversation, right? So, for example, people who do identity governance, or maybe the people who are more closely with the HR side. So what we have seen and the richness of the workshop format is that it allows you to either make it not only a deployment, like let's go over the deployment projects, but also as a way to educate themselves on the rest of the suite. So for example, if the networking team comes in and they don't know as much on the identity side, they will kind of get that extra time. So this is more like a baseline and a suggestion, but it could be as long as you want, depending on the level of the detail, thoroughness, or the questions people may have. So this is just a baseline, depending on how things go play by ear a little bit. And some partners even take longer when they actually go on and talk about like project management and things like that. So it's just a baseline.
So Martin, if we just jump back into that spreadsheet, right? Can you walk us through, one part of it that shows us, what the process is and, what are the different options that are there for people to select? And is it a live document that will be of use over a period of time, or is it just a one-time thing that we would fill in?
Yeah, so this is the star of the show, the spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is the focus of the workshop. And so you will go through each one of these suggestions one by one. And you'll see that there's progress and order of which you want to do all of these things. And so if you take one of these examples, there's a privileged users, and we'll talk about that. But this is an order in which you need to do those things. And we share a lot of information with you. And so, for example, define a policy that use least privilege roles. You may not know what that means. So you'll just click on that cell and it will open up a web page that actually describes that in a lot more detail and gives you even links to the Microsoft documentation where you can get more information on that specific suggestion.
Got it. Yeah, because the box has just a very short sentence, right? If I'm not really sure what it means, we can just read through it, understand what it really means. Okay, so we went through it, and the first one says, right, define policy and use least privilege role. So we understood that, and what do we do next?
So once you understand this, what you're going to do is you're going to actually pick one of these states. So somebody will say, oh, this is something that we've already done before. Privileged users is something that we tightly control, and we want to mark that as completed. So you select completed, and then you basically have stored that as a state in your environment. And by the way, you can create multiple copies of the spreadsheet so that you can do it with other customers if you're a partner type or consultant, or you can keep it as different versions of where you were. So there's many flexibilities that the spreadsheet capability gives you.
Right. I mean, I think we can even write notes, right?
Yeah, so this is very easy. You can just right click on that cell, add a note, and that you have a progress of what's happening, or maybe somebody said something that you need to remember. So this is everything that you need to do in one place.
The beauty of Excel. One last thing I want to mention on the States is that as we did it multiple times, one of the things that we also wanted to capture is all the nuances on the States in between. What we have seen in practice is that a lot of customers literally take the spreadsheet and presents it to their leadership, right? And then we want to also be sensitive about what they see in front of their leader, right? If something is like not started, or like you are doing something, like you are in the middle of doing it, we want to quote unquote capture that and give you credit when you present to your leadership. So that's why you have, like, for example, the nuance between planned and in planning is like, it's not that we have not thought about it. We have a plan. We just need budget, right? So then the idea of those interim states is to capture those nuanced situations. And then in the link that Martin shared, we explain a little bit what each of those states mean. But again, this is a result of you doing that many times and capture that richness in the spreadsheet.
Nice. Yeah, that really makes sense. So like you could say you're blocked and why you're blocked, right? It could be a technology problem or it could be a funding problem. And in the notes, you can add that in and that becomes like the current state of where you're at. Nice. That's neat.
And another thing that I also want to highlight here is we show people the implementation effort. So that's more the IT admin side and the user impact of each one of these recommendations. And so this is something that is also critical in your decision making. Because if you know something is going to be high implementation effort, which means that you have to plan this properly. You may have to set up an ongoing program to keep it up to date. The high implementation effort is something that you have to make sure that there's a budget for it. You plan this properly, all of that. And then on the user side, the impact might be low. Your users are not going to see what privileged users need to do. And so the impact on that side is also important, because if the user impact is high, then you have to think about a training campaign or something around awareness, so that you don't impact the productivity of your users. So I think in that case, now that everybody understands the spreadsheet, let's talk about some of these recommendations, so that we all aware of, like, what are we trying to get customers to do. And so for the Entra Suite, we've divided that into basically these 5 tabs. Establish a baseline, things that you need to get in place before you get going with your Entra Suite project. And then some getting started recommendations, as well as some things that we need to do to make sure that everything is in the right order for the important parts of the Entra Suite. So we have onboarding your workforce, enable remote access, and governing internet access.
Yeah, I think in the last webinar, the second webinar, that's what the getting started and established the baseline is what we covered. Things like making sure you have the basics in place, like MFA, cloud privileged users, having, the authentication set up, things like having a basic conditional access policy, joining your devices, for example, is a really important step that we covered before you can go off into, doing the other bits.
Yeah. And so obviously this is just our recommendation for people to make sure that their deployments are successful. A lot of people skip these things and they don't worry about it, but we want you to be successful. And so we don't want you to find out later that, oh, I need to think about all these other things, like how do I design my conditional access policies? How do I enroll devices in my environment? Because that will be necessary for successful Entra Suite deployment. So it's very important that people do all of those steps first. So I'm going to highlight some of these so that people are aware of these projects and how they need to roll them out. But most cases, if you are doing your job correctly, people will say, for example, for privileged users, I have done a deployment. So this is where you have privileged identity management. And then, as I indicated here, you can say this is completed. I don't need to worry about this because I'm confident that in my environment, I have set up privileged identity management correctly. But for those companies that haven't done this, it's part of the Entra Suite, but it's something that you need to do, that you ensure that you have the right zero trust posture. One of the things that we always highlight with zero trust is the principles of zero trust, and least privilege is a very important principle of zero trust. And ensuring that your privileged users don't have more access than they need is a critical step of zero trust. And going through each one of these steps will allow you to be confident and having the zero trust principle of least privilege in your environment, and that people don't have unnecessary access on an ongoing basis. So privileged identity management for your tier 0 roles, very important. And then making sure that you monitor what people are doing. So you can combine that with access reviews of your privileged roles in your environment. So this is one of the things that people forget, is they say, oh, I'm going to just set up my security, give people access, and then forget about it. You have to review that. So that's very important. And then finally, another aspect of zero trust is also monitoring what's happening in your environment. And so monitoring is something that you have to also set up correctly, and you have to do the necessary SecOps work to make sure that none of the bad things happen to you. And that's another principle in zero trust, is assume breach. So with the assume breach, you look at your logs and you look at what are people doing, what are the privileged users doing, and is those behaviors correct? And typically, you may link that up to a Sentinel system or something like that, so that you will be able to get all of those insights in there as well. But you have to make sure that you monitor your environment to make sure that it stays in a pristine state and you're not under attack in your environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of times where people discover only after breach that they don't have the logs to capture what happened. And these are like really important steps that you need to do as a foundation before you even think of the other things, right? Like there's no point doing all of the advanced, things before you have the basics in place.
And then just before you get started with the Entra Suite rollout, we will recommend that you go and check all of these things and make sure that you've successfully implemented a lot of these recommendations. So these include things like your conditional access posture. Conditional access is the way that you implement zero trust in your environment, and that's your policy engine. And so you have to make sure that you use the features that's available in conditional access the right way, and you gone through this process to decide, for example, authentication strength is a very important aspect of conditional access, because we know not all MFA methods are the same. I know we've been preaching to a lot of people that you have to enable MFA and it's very important, but when it comes to certain MFA mechanisms, it is some of them are okay and some of them are much, much better. And so you have to implement the right authentication strength methods for your organization as well. And I would also say that maybe you don't implement the same for all of your users. You might have office users that will have use Windows machines, so they can use Windows Hello for Business. Some of your other users will have devices, and so you can use the Microsoft Authenticator application. And then for some of your users, typically what we see is privileged users. You may want to use passkeys, which is a physical device. So that's all the things that you will do in your conditional access.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. So that will really help customers set up the basics they need, right? As we finish those first two tabs of getting started, making sure all the basics are in place. Now, as we move to the next step, right, which is starting with the Entra Suite deployment, I can see that the next step is all about first getting the identities in the right place and onboarding the workforce. So, Ramiro, how do we go about doing that?
Gotcha. So this is the first scenario, right? So let's talk about that one by one. So just as a reminder, when we take a swim line is basically a list of tasks that have dependencies on each other, so from left to right. But in this case, when they are separate, that means that you can do in parallel. So the first thing here is this swim lane about application access. So in Entra Suite, we have ID protection, ID governance, and global secure access. So to continue, this is beyond the basics, right? The first thing we do is roll out conditional access with risk control. So that is one task that basically going to enrich your security posture to bring that kind of dynamic policy based on risk. So that is very important and it's a no-brainer, particularly high-risk block and or reset credentials. So that is one that we cover over here. And then moving down, let's talk about the next one, which is identity governance, right? So in the previous scenario getting started, we have the HR pipeline, right? The basics. So you have a data source coming from HR and then being propagated to Entra, to Active Directory and the applications. So this is enriching on top of that with lifecycle workflows. A couple of things that the workshop calls out here is that when we put these boxes, we don't necessarily have only technical steps. So in the previous tabs, you saw things like make a decision of like stopping building applications that rely on Active Directory, for example. So these are non-technical steps, so we call them out as well. And here you see in the first couple of those, right? So first you have to do some design and some decision making or some solutioning, right? So identify what are the tasks that are needed to automate. And the couple of tasks that we want to call out explicitly that every customer needs to think about is how are you going to deliver the first credentials to the joiners or when an employee joins, right? So In some cases, maybe a manager sends it over, temporary access pass, for example, but you also need more things, right? So cut a ticket to provision like your workstation, your device, or physical space, whatever other considerations. And in some cases, some processes like physical access require that kind of orchestration. So this is what it's all about. And then the idea here is after you make those or identify those tasks, then we go into the next steps to identify the technical prerequisites to do that. So, for example, if you find that some tasks are going to require extensibility with, let's say, logic apps, then we are basically calling out that you need to identify what those are. That needs some thinking and design, right? So you need to procure the Azure subscription, you need to lock it down and define the logic app and so on, which is what we call out here, right? So deploy that logic, a runtime environment over here, and then we have a very some consistent playbook of first configure, right? So you configure the workflows for workforce. Based on the triggers that you want to configure, right? So it could be a joiner before joining, the day of joining, etc. So configure those and then roll it out. So in these documents, when you click and see the details, we call out some of the techniques there to roll it out. It may be by department, it may be by group of users in a region, depending on your rollout strategy. We just basically call it out. And then lastly over here, and this is very important, and Martin called it out, is very important, especially in lifecycle workflows and others that have extensibility, that you have a monitoring strategy in place. How is that strategy going to look like? Depends on what exactly are you automating, right? But then just making sure that if you have a custom logic in a logic app, that when that task fails, you have monitoring and triggering alerts for somebody to look at it, and ingesting the logs and things like that. So we call that out into that part of lifecycle workflows for the workforce. So it's basically all about lifecycle workflows.
Right. So I've seen this in as people modernize, and as you do this, right, you might move to more cloud joined or intra joined devices from the domain joined. So they take this as an opportunity to rethink, like, how do we get that initial password? Should we move to temporary access pass? And there's a lot of questions I get all the time from customers, like, because now they have to suddenly think about, that entire process, like, we've gone through COVID, what if it happens, scenarios like that happen again, how can people onboard remotely without having access to the domain? And it's really great to see that you put in that thought to help people think about that. And I like that we can click through and get some detailed guidance from Microsoft on what are some of the recommended approaches and the modern ways of doing these things.
Exactly right, Merrill. And then we call out just the authentication credentials, but that's just one step that everybody has to do. But on top of that, there's many other cool things that you can do, like sending a welcome email, Teams messages, be right access, and all that stuff. Now, speaking of be right access, then the next layer down is the life cycle of the access, right? So when an employee joins, then the workforce, based on the job function, they may have to have access to a set of applications. Some of them are going to be granted over time based on their role in the organization or as they work in projects together. So, for example, Meryl, Thomas, and I created a team with Martin to create the Entra Suite workshop. That was a project that came out internally for us to create. So we created a SharePoint site, Teams, etc. So all that project became an access package, and then we all were given access to the template that we use for Excel and things like that. All of that is part of what we call an access package. So this is all about creating that dynamic. So the first thing we are putting here on the left is, what are the things that need to happen in your organization based on your regulatory requirements, or your risk management, etc. Maybe in some cases you can just give it self-service, so any user can just get access to a particular resource. In some cases, it has to be a workflow approval. In some other cases, it would be somebody assigning as an owner or an administrator. So all these options that the tool allows, somebody needs to think about what are those requirements. Maybe you need to grant access just for a period of time. Let's say this resource, I'm going to allow people to give it for 3 months, but some others, I just leave it indefinitely and then revoke based on access review and things like that. So this is all about designing that piece. And then the other thing that we really recommend and encourage customers is deploy verified employee credentials. This is a mechanism that allows you to have authentication assurance levels. For example, for a particular project, you need to prove that the users need to have, I need to see that the user is really who they say they is with a verified credential. So this is a prerequisite. And then all of these from left to right are just steps to create those access packages, right? So then same thing as before, identify what do you need to do for extensibility, if applicable. But then this is also a very important service based on your organizational roles, then that maps it to resources and then policies. So this is all about mapping those to those controls. And then after that, then you create the access package. So you see a lot of these are designed and kind of making decisions, doing things differently based on the new toolkit. But then same playbook, created, in this case, is access packages per job function, this per roles, and then rolled it out over time to broader deployment rings or cohorts and so on. And then implement monitoring. There's one step here in the middle that I want to call out, which is when you roll out access packages, right? Then you have to have at some point in time some reconciliation, meaning X months later, you have to probably come back and make sure that all the access that is granted is aligned with what you have in the access packages. This is something that over time, the product is going to be smarter and do it on its own over time. But for now, we just call it out that you need to do it in order to make sure that the access is actually consistent with what you see in the resources. So this is the one about access lifecycle. And then lastly, very similar to the one for workforce, which we also want to call out, and it's something that we can do in parallel, and it's something that we see a lot of customers have a lot of accumulation of footprint over the years that needs to have some controls. Is all about the guests. So we call that out explicitly to bring guests' footprint to be in a governed state. So the first thing we're saying is, what are the requirements for you to onboard guests? So in some cases, will you allow self-service for your trusted partners, your vendors, etc.? Define those requirements. Define patterns of initial access for guests. So well-designed or explicit paths for guests to come into your environment. And then we align that with access packages. And then one thing that we do after we rolled out this access packages, as a good example that we got with one of my customers is a supply chain, right? So if you have suppliers, vendor suppliers, you know exactly that a supplier has to have access to a specific set of applications. Maybe it's a kind of CRM or ERP kind of resource. So you know that they need to have that, and it's always that set of resources. You can create that repeatable pattern as an access package for that supplier. And then access package is a great tool, and every customer should look into that. And then after that, that we put in in sequences, what are the process to clean up, right? So after inactivity, for example, clean out those guests on Entra. ID governance have mechanisms for you to bring customers or guests into what they call quote unquote governed state, which basically bring them in that train of after a certain period of inactivity, maybe an accessory you can just disable and then delete and that kind of thing. So this is an important thing, and we put it as a separate swim lane because you can do that in parallel. And in fact, this is what many customers can just start right away. And then lastly, as the others, is implement monitoring. Very important, as Martin pointed out. And I think that's pretty much what we have in the onboard. Again, we are going through an overview, but then I recommend that you, as part of delivering the workshop, click every box, look at the documentation, get familiar, and then we see all the details on the considerations in each one.
Nice. Thanks, Ramiro. So with that, we've sort of now got everyone into the system, right? They've come in, there's all access packages governing them. People who don't need access are taken off, cleaned off. People who do need access have the right permissions to access things. But now they're all in the system. They need to get to the applications to do their day job, right? Which is the whole point of this whole exercise. Entra is sort of the gateway to get people into the applications. But we know every org has a mix of the new cloud-based applications and also on-prem applications and servers, etc., that they need to access. And traditionally, this has all been VPNs, where you had remote access. You do this VPN and you just get access to all the applications, which we know we can do a lot better now and mix it in with all of the new capabilities like doing, phishing resistant auth, etc., for even accessing on-prem applications. And Entra Suite brings in all of this in a neatly tied package to help users. So, Thomas, walk us through all the neat capabilities that Entra Suite has to enable this flows.
Absolutely. Thanks, Meryl. So yeah, you touched on a couple of really important points. So many organizations do still rely on traditional VPN, and traditional VPN, as we know from researchers and what we've seen, and compromises of organizations, is typically a layer 2 connectivity. If not compensated otherwise, if you don't have any other segmentation or firewalling capabilities, it allows broad access to a wide range of network infrastructure, which you typically don't want to have in a full zero trust world. And as you touched on, Meryl, exactly the need for bringing identity together with the network is something we are enabling now with Entra Suite and capabilities in global secure access. What you will see here is the overview, and starting point is really the VPN modernization, or how do you get off from the traditional VPNs that may or may not be identity aware, and most of them are not identity aware. And then how do we combine that with all the richness of identity governance, bring it all under control, having rich visibility? So we'll walk through all of those steps. We wanted to always start with the basics. So for the first one is the organization should look into stop and buying or building Active Directory dependent applications and really look into modernizing. But we also totally realize that this is, still a good legacy footprint in many organizations. How do we help getting also these legacy applications in a zero trust protected manner? So how do we do that?
And before Entra Suite, like Entra didn't have any way to do this, right? The recommendation or the only way was to modernize the app so that you can use conditional access with, SAML and OIDC to be able to do the various checks on the device before giving access. And there was no way to enforce any of that.
Correct. So there was only one exception, which was application proxy. So yeah, with application proxy, we could do that for web-based applications, but rightly so for, let's say, if I have my on-prem file servers or my on-prem SQL servers or SAP servers, we would rely on partner solutions. So we do also offer the flexibility for customers, of course, to integrate with partner solutions. And now the nice thing with Global Secure Access and as part of Entra Suite is that we have this built-in capabilities as part of the whole product offering. So how do we start? So the first starting point in the VPN modernization is typically you wanted to enable quick access. So that's a capability which allows like a very easy transitioning from your existing traditional VPN into Entra private access. And alongside that, you also wanted to deploy the first connectors, which allow, really the connectivity to your on-prem infrastructure or your IaaS-based infrastructure. So the workloads could live both on-prem as well as in maybe Azure, AWS, GCP. We as long as we can deploy a connector there, we're fine on enabling the connectivity. As my colleagues also called out, we also give an indication of what we think and we've seen in other environments, how costly or how tricky certain steps are. So for this one, for example, we see that as a medium one. This typically involves a bit of a planning. Where do I place them? Maybe there is an element of hardware purchase or virtual machine provisioning required, but once that is done, it's a rather straightforward step. Then moving on, next step involves you wanted to start with a couple of key remote applications that you wanted to migrate or integrate directly, and also some of the customers also need to enable or a private DNS, which means how do I resolve my internal names to my remote clients. Maybe there's, customers have a split brain DNS setup, and as such, you will want to need a name resolution also to work for those remote clients. Then moving on, as embracing zero trust. So you bring then those remote apps under modern security controls. So MFA, so you apply conditional access policies on those applications. You can leverage then, device trust even for those legacy applications. That's really the nice thing, because those apps will, or application segments, what we call it, then will light up as, enterprise app in your tenant. And as such, we can apply conditional access policies to that. And you can apply all the richness of the controls that Entra ID offers you. So that's really, a great way for us. And as you see here, because many of the organizations are very familiar with conditional access and leveraging that, we believe that this is probably a low effort in terms of implementation. It may have a high impact to the end users because, depending on how your conditional access policy structure is built up, that may have an operational impact to the end users.
For Entra admins, I guess the advantage is they just bring the same skills they brought from doing conditional access for cloud apps.
Absolutely.
Now suddenly it extends it to all these on-prem applications that don't even know about Entra, to be able to apply those policies. And yeah, it's really cool to be able to do device-based checks and do all of those integrations with Intune into this space for applications that are not even in smart or aware of the change that's happening.
That's a great point, Meryl. So absolutely, that typically, it's rather tricky to migrate those legacy apps. So developers have left. Nobody owns the code anymore, right? And how do I protect those legacy apps? And now with Global Secure Access, we can exactly do that without touching the app. So we basically put a control in front of them, and then just leverage the capabilities of Entra ID for that. Absolutely. Yeah, moving on. Ultimately, we want also all of those legacy apps to bring under full governance lifecycle. So as I said, the nice thing is those legacy apps will light up as a enterprise app in your tenant. So that also means you can, bring them into an entitlement manage and also apply access packages too. So really the whole governance lifecycle would apply here.
Nice. So I can apply access packages usually would have been only for cloud apps, but now I can even apply that to internal apps and bring in the same sort of access reviews and all of that process into this flow, all without the app even not knowing about all of this or requiring group-based implementation in the app, etc. Right?
Absolutely. Meryl, spot on. So moving on then, on your journey, while you modernize and progress in your zero trust journey for those traditional VPN-based application access, you would then complete the migration of the applications. Maybe also move some of the app proxy-based workloads over. By the way, you can also run them side by side. So that's a great new capability. The Entra Private Access connector is actually capable of running both. The new capabilities for any TCP or any UDP traffic, as well as for the app proxy or web-based traffic. So that's a great addition that we make to make it easier for our customers to do that. Ultimately, we want to reach that state that you can decommission that VPN infrastructure and really shut off those legacy components, and then have all your application access governed and protected with Entra ID end to end. The last one here is a call out to design and implement SD-WAN capabilities. You see here that's a different color, so that's something what we call like a cross-pillar capability. We realize, and from the conversations that I had with my customers, is most of the organizations already have that or are in the process of doing that. And also we have as part of another effort that Meryl, Ramiro and myself are as part of the Zero Trust assessment. We have an even more comprehensive or detailed guidance also for that part. So if you're interested, go check that out as well. Now, moving on to the next part. So let's say you have done the basics. Now moving over to a finer grained zero trust approach. So that's what we call the segmentation. So how do you segment the application access based on business need? And the first part is you want to get an understanding of what your users are doing. So when I talk to my customers, most of the time when I'm going to ask is like, do you know what applications your users are actually accessing? And most of the time the answer is like, partially, or the honest answer is most of the time is no, I don't. And I'm not sure, Meryl's probably, what's your experience on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So people are not aware of who has access to what application. Most of the time in companies that have been there for a while, and even newer ones, is just a flat access, right? Like everyone gets access to all the applications, and then they later realize, oh, this person shouldn't have had access, like he's from sales, but why is he accessing this HR application? But because it's a legacy application, or sometimes it's servers, right? You have all of the servers, and some have HR data, some have sales data. There's no reason for the end user to even have like RDP or some visibility to the servers. But because it's a flat network, they all had access to the servers. And when there are things like 0 days, etc., it's like a flat network, and they're all vulnerable. The surface area is really, really huge. Everyone, if it's a 10,000 or 80,000, 100,000 users have access to that server, which was only needed by 10 people to sort of manage it from being able to remote into those servers, for example. So that's something that I've seen a lot, and a lot of customers struggle, especially with the older VPNs. They created all these profiles. It was really hard for them to manage it with all of those old school VPNs, because it's a lot of work to keep it all and maintain it, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely matches what I've seen. So same experience also from my side. So yeah, great example. So that's why you want to start with, getting visibility, and great capability that we have here is what we call app discovery, which allows you to get exactly that visibility into your infrastructure. Turn it on, let it run for typically 30 days is a good, average that we've seen to get a representative view on your environment. And while you leave that running, this is typically a time when you define your segmentation strategy. So how granular do you want and can, segment out those application segments based on business needs, so on criticality. So there's a couple of options, as Martin called out at the beginning. And follow the link of the guidance here for that specific blocks. We give, guidance on how organizations could think about how, you could apply a segmentation strategy. So once you've done that, and once you, let's say, have good visibility after a while, then it's time to migrate those applications off, let's say, that bigger segment that we talked about. Like you wanted to cut out that very large and flat network, so to speak, into really segmented application segments based on business need and business criticality. Again, great integration capability. So we make it really easy as part of the application discovery as almost like a one-click experience to onboard, a certain application or applications into a application segment. You bring it into conditional access, apply the needed security controls, and have that segmentation capability defined. Moving on, alongside that, you also wanted to, bring specifically the sensitive applications under a PIM control. So, for example, folks who are familiar with the tiering concept and on-prem, so tier 0, tier 1, tier 2. So if you wanted to protect your tier 0 servers and bring them under PIM control, you can do that now very easily because, again, it's deeply integrated into Entra ID as the identity provider. And the final one here in this swim lane is the call out to additional segmentation capabilities for Azure IaaS, for example. So if you have workloads in Azure IaaS, as mentioned earlier, so as part of the Zero Trust Assessment workshop, we have a full, another swim lanes specifically also for Azure IaaS segmentation and additional capabilities there. So don't forget to check that out. So moving on, for the on-prem protection, just a quick call out. There's additional new capabilities that we've added. So specifically, I want to call out the DC agent, which gives an even tighter control for your on-premises domain controllers, which gives even richer control also for your legacy app protection, corpus-based application access as a hint there. And then we also just enabled the intelligent local access. So how do I route most efficiently while still protecting your application access on-prem?
So that would help improve performance for people, needing to access an application. They don't need to
Absolutely.
go like over the globe.
Exactly,
to connect to an
exactly
app.
that. The last one I want to cover here is the monitoring pillar. So that's what we call the horizontal swim lane. It covers the different elements of the monitoring. So a big part of Zero Trust is also, getting visibility to be able to respond quickly. So we have capabilities for traffic monitoring as a new capability, audit logs. You can and should, potentially export it to your existing SIEM solution. So that's all available. We also have, built-in workbooks that you can use and customize at your own needs. And also we have, Sentinel integration natively. So if you're using Sentinel, you can directly leverage that native Sentinel integration.
Awesome. Thanks, Thomas. So that covered all of the private access and on-prem and the legacy applications that people would need access to. What about all the cloud applications, right? Like not even applications, like, the different sort of sites I go to. There could be sites that have malware, and we want to protect users from ending up in the wrong places if, they've been sent a malicious link or through search or in other ways. So how does Entra Suite help in that area?
Great question, Meryl. So we have another capability which helps you on that. It's called Entra Internet Access, and similar as with the VPN and Zero Trust Network Access that we saw before, we see still several organizations rely on classic proxy server, outbound proxy servers on-prem, and similar problem statement there. It's typically not identity aware or only partially identity aware, maybe not really integrated into your IDP and maybe also to your SIEM solution, right? So how do you quickly respond if, exactly as I said, my users going to those, malicious site and then, get malware on the devices? So yeah, here's a similar concept as you see. We're trying to outline based on the capabilities. So starting with what we call base secure web gateway. And I don't want to go over each of the boxes, but really, walking you through the different steps, onboarding the traffic to the internet access capabilities. I want to call out maybe one control which is very new, is the compliant network, which helps, making the policy control or policy design easier or more streamlined. And once you've done the base secure web gateway capabilities, you wanted to move on to protecting M365, where we added new capability, what we called universal tenant restriction, which is a very powerful control, which not just protects the authentication plane, but also the data plane when you're accessing M365 services.
Yeah, I've seen that ask come quite often, right? Because when like the Microsoft services it's like just teams.microsoft.com. So how do I as a company make sure, say if I'm a bank, I don't want users accessing another Teams instance run by maybe their personal account or another company and sharing files, etc. How do I block all of that? And it used to be very difficult to do that. Or for example, the harder thing was, I want some people to be able to access, who've been approved because they're working with vendors, other suppliers, and they need to access certain sites. But how do I keep, the people who don't need that access, like maybe they're tellers or some retail staff, etc., and they don't need to access another tenant? How do I do it based on an identity of the person? I've seen that sort of challenge come up quite a lot.
Absolutely. Spot on, Meryl. So it's exactly that. And, who can authenticate to a tenant, but also as you said, like who can access data in on-prem. And we, with Global Secure Access, we give that integrated control as part of the new capabilities. So let me move on to the advanced secure web gateway capability, and a key functionality that I want to call out here is TLS inspection. So TLS inspection, once you have that enabled, allows additional capabilities, network DLP, threat intel filtering, cloud firewall. As you see here, some of them are still on the roadmap, which means they're in private preview at the moment, and will come up in public preview very soon. Another one that we hear quite often is, I can maybe not deploy an agent or the GSA client to my clients, or I have, B2B guest users or partners that need access to my applications and also wanted to protect them filtering. What you can do here is what we call the agentless secure web gateway. We have capabilities there that organizations can leverage. And as you see here, we support M365 as well as the compliant network control, and also general internet access. So think of it as, I have let's say a guest Wi-Fi that allows access as part of my Redmond campus. How do I protect my business guests in that environment? And similar as with the ZTNA pillar, or VPN modernization part, we have this horizontal monitoring swim lane. Very similar as you see here. The additional one that I want to call out is the remote network health logs. So what I just mentioned, for the agentless scenario, there is an additional component which will log into your tenant, and then you have signals and visibility into all those remote networks, and allows you to act on that. Again, call out to the Sentinel integration. So it gives you pre-built workbooks. As an interesting side story, we as Microsoft, we have also enabled that in our production tenant. And as part of that integration, we did get additional signals for locations which we didn't expect traffic to come from. So highly recommend to look into that. Definitely like an additional great visibility for our customers.
Awesome. Perfect. So thanks a lot, Thomas. So just to recap a lot of what we've gone through, right? We saw the initial process where Martin spoke about getting the baseline, all the prerequisites that you need to set yourself up for success. And then we spoke about onboarding your identities into Entra, where Ramiro covered all the different scenarios, including internal as well as external users, which most people forget. And then we saw the internet access and the private access, right? Legacy applications, as well as all of the neat things that we do with the cloud application. So all of those tied in together is an amazing way to roll this out in a really simple way. And that's what I really like about the whole Entra Suite. It sort of brings in these capabilities. Ramiro, you had a few closing thoughts, right, on this integration?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that the power of the suite is putting all these controls together, right? So when I talked about onboarding the workforce, right? So the workforce may have access not only to SaaS applications, but also private access applications, right? So applications that happen to be in your data center. When you combine all these controls together, then you have a very powerful solution. For example, some sites may be something that you don't want to have allow permanently to everybody in the organization. So you can put an access package to say, hey, when the pen testing team, for example, needs to do this is going through a red team exercise, then at that point, during that period of time where they have that exercise, we're going to grant them access to, let's say, Pastebin or some of these tools that typically used for those kind of engagements. But in the meantime, nobody else has it. So it's not only governed access, it's just in time, just enough, and it's just for a period of time. So those controls exist already in like access packages, but then when you combine it with this, scenario, then you have very powerful set of controls, even for applications that are not integrated with Entra, in the case of these public tools, but also in private access, like you don't give access to the whole network, only to the segments to the application, all of that with the control that we just discussed. So think about putting those together. As you saw in the previous webinars, right? The cool demos that you see, this is how you get to that. Following these steps, you can build up to creating that same experiences for your own environment.
Awesome. So thanks, folks, for joining us for this 3-part webinar. We covered a lot, and we hopefully this gives you a way to be successful in deploying the overall Zero Trust story instead of just a product. You're going through the entire process, right? And making sure these are all set up in a cohesive way, and the spreadsheet and the workshops really help to bring those in, bring all the right stakeholders in, and set you up for success to deploy them. And the other sort of the final myth that we wanted to talk about was people thinking that it's different for identity versus networks are very different and having different skills. We saw that with Entra Suite, it sort of brings a lot of that together. Those roles are merging, and it reduces the number of gaps you have when they are done in different silos. So you can bring a whole identity-based story and giving just-in-time access, like as Ramiro mentioned, to services, or even if you do need to give access, you give it access for a period of time and automatically expire that. With Entra Suite and access packages and the GSA private public access, it makes it really seamless to do. Things you had to sort of cobble together with different solutions, you can now do it with a simple control plane that is really easy to do. So we hope you enjoyed this 3-part series, and we would love to hear from you. We'll share all of the links for what you need. Please post comments, and we'll get your comments when you reply to them. And we have shared these QR codes with you as well. So inside the workshop as well, we have a link for you to provide feedback. When you run these workshops with different customers, if you're a partner who's running it, or if your customer is running it yourself, please do give us feedback on the workshop, things we can improve, the things if you found any gaps, we really want to know that. Or if you simply liked it and you think it's amazing, please let us know. We would love to know how we are using it and how we can improve them. So thanks again for joining, and we hope you found all of this valuable.